You're listening to an archive edition of River to River. I'm Ben Kiefer. Today, highlights from a recent conversation I had with political scientist Jeffrey Winters of Northwestern University. The focus of our conversation, his new book titled The Blind Spot: How Oligarchs Dominate Our Democracy. In it, Winters traces how extreme concentrations of wealth have shaped political power from ancient Athens and Rome through feudal Europe to the present-day United States. He argues that, for the first time in human history, the domination of many by the ultra-wealthy few is being accomplished through democracy, not against it. Citizens vote, participate, and consent, and in doing so, they ratify a system that Winters argues is designed to protect oligarchic interests above all. Our conversation took place on stage at the Englert Theatre in Iowa City on May 7th, 2026. For this event, IPR partnered with the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council, Prairie Lights Books, and the Englert. Jeffrey Winters started the evening by reading an excerpt from the opening of his book.
My earliest political memory as a boy was overhearing my father dismissing American democracy. "The rich control everything," he said to his buddies sitting around our kitchen table. They all seemed to agree. Everyone at that table that day was a high school graduate, a union member, and had grown up voting Democrat. Too young to grasp how the rich might be controlling everything, I wasn't sure what to make of this critique of our political system. The only rich people I could think of lived down the street. Their car smelled new, and there was no junk in their backyard. It wasn't until I arrived at college that I actually had the luxury of studying democracy and inequality. One of the first things I learned was that those people down the street with the nice car definitely were not rich. This was confirmed my junior year when, thanks to a work-study job, I joined a semester abroad on a ship along with 600 other students. As my taxi arrived at the dock, I was astonished to see a traffic jam of stretch limousines ahead of us. At sea, rich students played poker for pots worth over $25,000. During a stop in Cairo, one student bought 3 straight Egyptian Arabian horses and shipped them home to the US. Here at last, I had come face to face with extreme wealth, though I was yet to understand the immense political influence these riches could buy. Years later, I was confronted again with my father's ideas about democracy and the rich in a doctoral seminar offered by Robert Dahl, one of the 20th century's most influential scholars of American democracy. Dahl was too well informed to believe that anything remotely close to government of, by, and for the people existed in America or anywhere else. He believed that elites were in charge, but because they disagreed with each other, and some occasionally had to compete for votes among the masses, there was division and pluralism among the powerful. Democracy was saved. Perhaps so, but there was a glaring problem. Dahl focused only on elites, a general category of officials or public figures ranging from Joe Biden to Gandhi to Martin Luther King, whose power had nothing to do with riches. But he ignored oligarchs, a distinct group also at the top, empowered by wealth, ranging from familiar figures like George Soros to recluses like Timothy Mellon. By leaving the role of oligarchs out of the picture, Dahl could not explain how the rich wield so much political control, nor why wealth was becoming vastly more concentrated into fewer and fewer hands. The puzzling question we must ask is this: why hasn't 2 centuries, at least, of increasingly free and equal voting prevented us from becoming more unequal? The conclusion I've come to is this: the inability of modern democracy to address wealth inequality is not a flaw. The failure is by design.
This is River to River. I'm Ben Kiefer. Today we're listening to my conversation with political scientist Jeffrey Winters, recorded on May 7th, 2026, at the Englert Theatre in Iowa City. His new book is titled The Blind Spot: How Oligarchs Dominate Our Democracy.
Jeffrey Winters, so many aspects to pick apart there that we can do in the next hour here, and no doubt our audience will have many informed questions that we'll get to in a few minutes. But I wanted to, many surprises in your book. One of them is that, and it's also important because we're celebrating the 250th anniversary of our country this year, but the founders were themselves oligarchs, you say here. And you argue that the Constitution they designed reflected their interests, property protections, indirect elections. The Senate, we talk about many aspects of that, and some people don't understand why the Senate is the way it is. I wonder, in political science, when we go back to the founders, and you say they were all oligarchs and it was designed to reflect and uphold oligarchy, is that a controversial claim in your field, or is that more or less accepted?
I think it's a somewhat controversial claim. If you ask the average American high school student who takes AP history, they will be told that the reason that our second Constitution was written, the reason the framers gathered in Philadelphia in 1787 was because there was squabbling among the states and the Articles of Confederation were weak, and there were just a lot of problems. The story, that's part of the story. There's no doubt that those things are true, but there's an enormous, important part of the story that isn't mentioned, isn't told. And if I could just tell it briefly, here's what happened. The question we have to ask ourselves is, when they went to Philadelphia in May of 1787, why then? Why exactly then? There had been actually many calls to have a convention, and no one showed up. 6 states voted against even holding a convention. Many of the leaders in the various states, having just thrown off the British, really didn't want to put a new, powerful government over themselves. So the resistance to holding the convention went on year after year after year. But suddenly, in 1787, the framers did not just gather, they ran to Philadelphia in a panic. Why? Very simple answer. During the 1780s, there was an enormous economic crisis in the United States. That crisis was after the war. It was particularly a debt crisis. I won't go into all the particulars here, but the bottom line is this. Debtors in the United States at that time were having their properties foreclosed on, and something a lot of people don't remember is that the very first prisons in the United States were debtors' prisons. And so if you were in debt and couldn't pay, you were thrown into horrible prisons together with rapists, murderers, and so on, simply because you couldn't pay your debts. What happened is that there were 13 states, half of the states were actually dominated and captured by small farmers. They were very representative of the common people. The other half were dominated by creditors, by oligarchs. And so when the people began to demand relief during this credit crisis, and they didn't want to go, didn't want their land taken, their farm animals, and end up in debtor's prison, they asked their legislatures for relief. And that's when things like printing paper money happened. Some of you may recall Madison saying the wickedness of paper money. To us, it doesn't make any sense today. But at the time, printing money was actually something creditors didn't want because they didn't want to be repaid with paper. Well, it turns out that in half of those states, the laws were passed in favor of debtors, and it basically gave creditors a haircut. In the other half of the states, they were called the hard currency states, no relief. No matter what the people did, it's because the creditors were dominant in those states. All of this was unfolding in the 1780s. And why then did they gather in Philadelphia? The answer is this. First, the framers looked at what democracy was producing, and their conclusion was there is an excess of democracy in the United States. It is hurting the rich. Alexander Hamilton, Broadway Hamilton, said those words in the convention. Too much democracy. We must tamp it down. In the states that were not responsive, the people rose up. Massachusetts, Shays' Rebellion, what was that about? They actually rose up. They didn't shoot anyone, no one. When they marched with fife and drum and their guns, they did two things. They didn't attack the rich. They didn't burn down their businesses. They went to the debtors' prisons and they freed the prisoners. And they blocked the courts and the judges from being able to throw anyone else in debtors' prison. The combination of these two things so alarmed the oligarchs of the day that they ran to Philadelphia and they said, we have a pyramidal society, but our democracy is too flat. We need to create a pyramidal democracy that will actually sustain the pyramid of our social and economic distribution. And so they created a house. And the purpose, and that's the only thing the people were allowed to vote on. And then there was a Senate. The Senate's job was to block the House in case the people did anything that was out of control. Then they created a president who could veto if by some incredible possibility something unacceptable to the rich got up. And then finally, 5 people could block the rest of all of democracy on the Supreme Court. Think of it like a sort of an enormous layered wedding cake of obstacles and safeguards. That laid the foundation for how oligarchy and democracy would coexist in the United States.
Back with more of my conversation with Jeffrey Winters in just a moment. I'm Ben Kiefer. It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer, and today you're listening to an archive edition of our program. Let's get back to more highlights from a recent conversation with political scientist Jeffrey Winters. His new book is titled The Blind Spot: How Oligarchs Dominate Our Democracy.
We had a transformational period in the 1970s. The post-war period until 1970 approximately is a period of, well, a low point for the oligarchs, right?
Absolutely.
And so take us through in a broad flyover of that time from perhaps the Gilded Age to the current time.
That's a great question, Ben, because it also brings up the point of why is it that we're even talking so much about oligarchs right now? I'd love to think that it was because I wrote a book in 2011. It's not the reason. We're talking about it because this is the first time, this moment is the first time since the Gilded Age, not that we've had oligarchy, but it's been this visible. Most of the time, it is actually the invisibility of the relationship between oligarchy and democracy that sustains it and makes it stable. Because the idea is we see so much actual democracy going on that we think, well, we're in a democracy, right? This is working. It's legitimate. We just have to try harder. But when oligarchy becomes incredibly visible and dominant, suddenly people start to say, wait a minute, I'm not sure there's much democracy really functioning here that matters. So the Gilded Age, it was the last time, actually, that oligarchs, which were called then not oligarchs but robber barons, it's the last time when people were so agitated by the sheer brazenness, the giddiness of power that was being expressed at the time. And there was a reaction to that. There was a backlash. It doesn't go well for oligarchs when they become incredibly visible. It reveals too much, and that causes political problems. So 1894 is a very important year. It was the first time a non-war or non-crisis income tax was imposed. The exemption was so high that it fell only on 1/3 of 1% of the population. the entire Congress and Senate, all the way up to the president, passed what was essentially a tax on the ultra-wealthy in response to the Gilded Age. That was what the politics produced. By the way, the very next year, remember I told you the Supreme Court was partly created as a safeguard, struck it down and said it's unconstitutional to tax people with income. It took 18 years, and the only way to fight back was to actually change the Constitution. The 16th Amendment in 1913 allowed us once again to put the income tax in place. And then it was once again introduced only on the very richest. That was the politics that came out of the Gilded Age, a progressive era, an era of democratic effervescence, you might say. Ever since that income tax was put in place, the struggle of oligarchs has been to shift the tax off themselves to the rest of the population and not pay it. Here we are now in this era of what I call in the book, in-your-face oligarchy. So the oligarchs have been there, but thanks to decisions like Citizens United, which basically validates the use of unlimited money in our political system, and thanks to 50 years of incredible victories on the part of oligarchs to reduce their taxes, 91% in the 1950s, 39% now.
And we look back at the 1950s as if there is any era when we would say make America great again, we would point to the 1950s when that tax rate was what?
91%, the highest tax bracket.
And we are booming here in the post-war economy.
Right. So there were 56 tax brackets. We have 7 today. It's not random that that happens. That's an expression of power, that the system gets changed in that way. Some of you may know the Rand Corporation. It's not a lefty radical organization. It's very conservative. In 2020, the Rand Corporation did a study, and it asked a simple question. If we just maintain the inequality of 1975, don't change it, just project it forward, what would be the median income in the United States today? 60 to 80% higher than it currently is. They estimated that $55 trillion shifted upward from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. 55 trillion. That's an expression of power. And those successes have made oligarchs feel empowered. They feel it is right. We have more centimillionaires and billionaires running for office. It used to be that you operate through others, through politicians, fund them, get them going, keep them going. Now, the sense of empowerment and entitlement is so high that they're running themselves.
Jeffrey, I wanted to make sure we understood who the modern-day oligarchs are, because the part that you read, it's very clear in your book, you separate oligarchs from elites and just rich people, right? There's a big difference in reading your book. That we're talking about as few as 1,000 people in this country?
Well, oligarchs are a very hard sort of line to draw. Where are they? Think of it as shades of gray going into black. So there's an industry out there that I call the wealth defense industry, and their job, it is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and their sole job is to serve the ultra-wealthy, to basically make sure they hold on to their wealth and don't pay taxes and there's no redistribution. They set the base group that they serve at $30 million of financial assets. That's the group that has enough money to use wealth to defend wealth. That's sort of the bottom line of where oligarchs start globally. How many of those people are there in the world? The answer? About 250,000. Half of those people are in the United States, 150,000. And half of those 150,000 have 100 million or more, and we have 900 or 1,000 billionaires. And we are close to having our first trillionaire. So that's the contours. The vast majority of oligarchs and the use of money to defend wealth is not visible. The vast majority isn't visible. Some of these actors are household names. And that's actually making a lot of the others nervous. The ones who aren't seen, the ones who are expressing their power and winning battles quietly. So those are who the oligarchs are. And if I can say what oligarchy is, a lot of people think that oligarchy is like democracy. It's rule by the few instead of rule by the many. I don't think that's a good way to understand what oligarchy is. Oligarchy has existed for thousands of years through all kinds of different political systems. It can be with an authoritarian system. It can be with a monarchy. It can be with a democracy. You should understand oligarchy as the politics of wealth defense. It is that.
I ran across this. How many oligarchs does it take to screw in a light bulb? Do you know the answer to this?
I'm supposed to be an expert on this, but I can't answer.
None. Darkness is more favorable to their interests.
Wow. I wish I had come up with that.
Well, let's do this. And people who've listened to shows that I've done in for audiences before know I like to do applause polls. So I thought we could use, with your help, Jeffrey, an applause poll to see if we have any oligarchs in our audience. I'm going to ask some questions, and you need to be courageous if you are an oligarch, and this applies to you. I have specific questions. You know, in those personality tests in popular magazines, you find out if you're this type of person. Right, okay, so we're finding out who is an oligarch. And clap if you own a yacht. Do you have a person whose entire job is to talk to your other people? Have you ever borrowed money? Not because you needed it, but specifically to avoid paying taxes.
Oligarchs do that all the time.
Yeah, explain. That's a fascinating one. Why do they do that?
So look, in the United States, there are income taxes and there are wealth taxes. It is considered legitimate to tax incomes. And since none of you said you're an oligarch, maybe one or two of you are lying, but since none of you say you're oligarchs, you all get W-2s and your taxes are taken out before you even see the money. Oligarchs understand that income is taxed. They don't take any. Therefore, they don't pay any income taxes. But then you may say, how do they live? How do they buy things? And the answer is, if you have 100 billion shares of Acme Corporation, whatever, you go to a bank, you pledge some of your shares, and you borrow money against your shares. And you don't pay taxes on what you borrow. And then you pay a 4% interest rate on your borrowing. And you keep doing this year after year after year, and you never, ever pay taxes. Now, there's a big debate in the United States, Ben, about possibly having a wealth tax. And some people say, we don't tax wealth. This is America. We tax income. Not true, ladies and gentlemen. What is the #1 store of wealth for the average American? Your home. Are you taxed? Your wealth is taxed. Now that, same for an oligarch, but that's the smallest part of their wealth. Their wealth is not taxed. Your property, your store of wealth is reassessed by your county on a regular basis. You don't have to sell it. You are tracked its value. And here's the most vicious part of all, ladies and gentlemen. You are taxed not only on your equity, but your mortgage. You're taxed on the full value of your house. You're taxed on your debt. Isn't that extraordinary? No one is proposing a wealth tax in the United States that taxes the debt of oligarchs. Why do I point this out? Because that industry, Ben, that arose in the 1970s, the wealth defense industry, armies of lawyers and accountants and others whose sole job was to take that incredibly high tax rate and make sure that oligarchs don't have to pay it. Move money offshore, tax shelters, trusts, on and on and on. Lobby Congress for changes in the tax code itself. Put paragraphs into the tax code that work for oligarchs. All of that was done starting in the 1970s, and there is no parallel entity or force that works on behalf of the average citizen. We all pay our taxes, oligarchs don't.
If you've just joined us today on River to River, we're listening to highlights from a recent conversation with Northwestern University political scientist Jeffrey Winters. He's author of the new book, The Blind Spot: How Oligarchs Dominate Our Democracy.
I feel like, I've been studying oligarchs for 25 years. If I'm of any use at all, I ought to be able to say something about what would be effective, actually, in doing something about this. I say there's two kinds of politics in history. The politics of the ordinary, that is our everyday, the wheels of politics turn, we all do our politics. That's normal politics. And the question is, what is possible during the politics of the ordinary? And there are lots of policies. We had McCain-Feingold, and we've had lots of policies. We've had high tax brackets. We've done better in the past. And so it's important to understand that there are things we can do. But then there's a second kind of politics, and it's called the politics of crisis. And the politics of crisis is very important because it turns out that oligarchs are strongest during the politics of the ordinary. When crises happen, war, deep depressions, tremendous disruptions, oligarchs actually are not at their peak power. They face constraints, and decision makers become much more focused on stabilizing the system than necessarily defending oligarchs. And it is during crises that opportunities exist for us to introduce deep, transformative changes that would make a difference. But this is the key thing, and why do I call it the politics of preparation? You cannot formulate those ideas and those transformations and changes at the last minute. You have to actually think them through, design them. And the ideas are going to appear to people as nuts because they're unthinkable during the politics of the ordinary, but they're doable and they're thinkable during the politics of crisis. I put forward a number of quite modest as well as incredibly deep transformations. The modest ones I won't bore you with. Let me tell you a really deep one. Eliminate the Senate.
Well,
the Senate has one function, to block the House. It has no other function. I would also increase the Supreme Court to 45 people.
No joke.
No joke. And half the Supreme Court would be chosen by lottery nationally. By the way, the lottery is not for you and me. I can't be a Supreme Court justice. You have to at least have a law degree and served as a judge once. We will also have some who go in, not via the Senate, but via the House, because the Senate will be gone, remember. Why do that? Well, I have a political science department that has 45 people. We are able to deliberate issues in great detail. We are able to consider them, but it's not 9 people, 5 of whom can cancel an entire democracy.
Jeffrey, I have to ask, do you also have recommendations that are possible?
Right. I called those boring. They're actually not boring. Okay. Let me give you an example of something that is not only possible, but has been done, but recently defeated. I'm going to guess. Clap. I love your clapping thing.
Okay.
Clap if you have ever heard of the CTA, the Corporate Transparency Act. Clap. Okay. It is one of the most important laws passed in the last 5 to 7 years. No one knows about it. What is the Corporate Transparency Act? Let me explain. Oligarchs and the wealth defense industry are able to operate so effectively for a number of reasons. One is their money and their arrangements are complex. But number 2, they are secret, invisible, and hidden. Many of you know that you can form an LLC or a corporation in the United States, in Delaware, Wyoming, and all over the place, where what is called the beneficial owner of the corporation is not known and cannot be known. Oligarchs are defended by that non-transparency. In 2021, as part of the Defense Authorization Bill, the Corporate Transparency Act was introduced. Not to go after oligarchs, but because of money laundering and terrorism and all kinds of other it was a bipartisan decision, and it passed. And what did it say? The CTA said that there are 33 million corporations in the United States. It was targeting shell corporations. And the key question was this: who owns it? Simple. Who is the beneficial owner? This law required a national registry where everyone had to reveal who owned. It was passed, ladies and gentlemen. In 2024, the website was created and the registry began. In 2025, as the Treasury Department was finishing the rules on who would be exempted, this Treasury Department exempted 99.9% of all corporations. No headline, no CNN story, and yet the effect of winning that decision against oligarchs and the protection that was put in place for them all happened off the radar screen. We can do the CTA again. It's still law, ladies and gentlemen. It's just that everyone's exempted from it.
After a short break, the rest of my conversation with political scientist Jeffrey Winters. I'm Ben Kiefer. It's River to River from IPR News. You're listening to an archive edition of River to River. I'm Ben Kiefer. Let's get back to the rest of my conversation, recorded at the Englert Theatre in Iowa City with political scientist Jeffrey Winters. Winters is author of The Blind Spot: How Oligarchs Dominate Our Democracy. During the evening, we had time for a number of questions from members of the audience.
I want to do sort of a lightning round with questions from this audience that have been submitted. So I'll ask you to get right to the kernel. Here we go, okay? It sounds like you would support a pure democracy system, asks someone in our audience. How is the federal government supposed to be stable in a pure democracy?
I believe in a representative democracy. So pure democracy, at least as political scientists understand it, it goes all the way back to the Greeks, mobocracy and sort of everything by polling and referendum. So I believe in representative democracy.
You've argued, this audience member writes, that oligarchy doesn't replace democracy, but often operates alongside of it. For people who care deeply about civic participation, as we do in Iowa City, for local problem solving, what is the most important misconception we should let go of when thinking about how power actually works in democracy shaped by extreme wealth? What don't we get about it?
Money is not voice. The Supreme Court in 2011 said that money is voice. It is not. Money is material power. And it is a kind of power that all of us with voice don't have. We must fight back against that incredible. By the way, the reason we're talking about oligarchs today is because that decision opened the floodgate in a way that nothing else had before. But the Supreme Court did it, ladies and gentlemen. And reversing this, are you ready for an amendment to the Constitution? Oh, okay. Well,
was that an applause poll?
that was an applause poll.
Great question from the audience. Definitely wanted to touch on AI, which we talk about and dissect every day and think, what will it be like in 5 or 10 years? It's on a fast acceleration track. This questioner says, in previous eras, oligarchs needed the labor of the people and could be checked by the people through that need, say unions, right? Organized labor. Now it looks like AI will displace the need for labor. How can people then check oligarchs in our future, our AI future? Wow, if you can answer that.
Am I allowed to say I'm completely stumped? I think about AI the same way all of you do. I don't understand what its implications are going to be. I don't understand how, if we're going to replace people, we somehow will not deeply destabilize and tear at the fabric of our society. I don't know how we do that. We have people who think we can. Let me just say this. When I said the politics of preparation and the fact that we might go into crisis, AI might be the source of that crisis. The question is, what will we be ready to do if, God forbid, such a terrible thing happened to our society? So we have not seen the last crisis that is deep and hard for us. The question is, what are we ready to do?
Let's talk about war. We're in a war now. War has always been good for certain oligarchs. We know that. Defense contractors, energy interests, financial firms, they move capital in times of instability. Jeffrey, when you look at the U.S.-Israel campaign against Iran, who in your framework is benefiting from this conflict? Who do you see, and do you see oligarchic interests shaping the actual decision to fight?
Well, this is going to take us beyond a discussion of oligarchs who are Americans, and I think it takes us into the oligarchs who populate the Middle East. And we've seen that there are monarchies and there are powerful oil interests who very much want this war to completely reshape the Middle East to their benefit, to their wealth accrual benefit. So I would say there are oligarchs all over the world. There's estimated to be about 5,000 billionaires globally. And so I would say those actors, and they're not so visible, they're not so easy to detect, but don't think for a moment that moneyed interests are not involved directly in this conflict.
This questioner gets at a point as we near the end of our discussion. We have to know more from you, Jeffrey, your thoughts on where we can go from here, what individuals can do. Here's the question. Now that your audience understand the oligarchy democracy system, how do we change it? Get out of these seats tonight, get up tomorrow, the day after. Do we have any levers? Because we, applaud if you actually, in this whole, after this discussion, if you feel relatively or completely helpless. Are you saying that there is no helplessness, or can we do something to empower ourselves?
So, I write about oligarchs, and it can be a pretty depressing topic. When you do it a long time, you wear yourself down. And yet, a friend of mine said something very interesting. He said, "You've written this new book. There must still be hope in you. You wouldn't do it if you didn't think that something could be done." And I think there's truth in that. Look, I'm a firm believer in the fact that when people mobilize, when they fight, they do get results. I firmly believe that. But it can only be done when we don't fight on those many societal, identity, and other kinds of things that separate us. You cannot possibly confront oligarchs if you are constantly fighting with the non-rich among each other, constantly blaming each other, constantly looking for scapegoats. So what kind of politics will it take? It takes a different kind of mindset. What I try to do in my own small way is prime that pump, try to get people to think in ways that they understand the challenges we confront. And then, folks, have at it. And I know that it sounds absolutely impossible to do something about this, but I do think that under the right circumstances, deep change can happen.
And you make the point that being aware of where we are in this sort of crescendo toward increasing oligarchical power is important, because when you have a crisis, the Great Depression, you have the oligarchic power decline and perhaps change come. Do you see us on that trend line anywhere where action would, at a particular moment, and what we'll be watching for to tell us that the political moment is right for great political change?
Yeah, the very fact that all of you are sitting in this room, the very fact that during the last 2 years there has been rallies all over the country regarding fight oligarchy, the fact that it's even being talked about is indicative of change. People are agitated. Let me put it this way. When you watch Bernie Sanders' videos of when he does this fight oligarchy, and he gets up there and he says, the millionaires and the billionaires, and there's inequality in America, the crowd will say, yeah, boo. But when he says that they're using their wealth power to crush your democratic voice, the crowd is really angry. It's not just the wealth inequality that upsets the people. It is the fact that something very fundamental that they value, which is that one person, one vote matters in terms of how we share power in the system. If you want to upset Americans, that's how you do it. Let me tell you just a small anecdote, Ben. I teach a course at Northwestern called Oligarchs and Elites. I taught it for the first time in 2007. And on the very first day, a Northwestern undergraduate threw down the gauntlet. He said, Russia has oligarchs the United States has rich people. And what he was saying was that we don't actually have oligarchs. That's something that is associated with the corrupt source of your money. And we don't have that in the United States. Here's what's very interesting. That's kind of a detour in the definition of what oligarchs are, because since Aristotle and Plato, oligarch has always meant those who are empowered by wealth. Full stop, period. And we have now closed that detour. In the United States today, it doesn't matter what the source of your money is or whether it was corrupt, as in Russia. Today, Americans are saying oligarchs are these incredibly visible, ultra-wealthy people who are distorting our democracy. That's where the conversation is. So, Ben, that gives me a sense of optimism that we're focusing on this in a way that we have not in 120 years.
I want to hypothetically invite another person on the stage for your benefit, for our benefit. Let's invite, we didn't have any, identify any. I still am not sure there aren't any out there. But if you could ask one oligarch, could sit across from an oligarch on this stage, historical or living, and ask them one question, what would it be? Who would you like to talk to as an oligarch, living or in the past? What would you want to find out? Or have you really plumbed the depths and know everything there is about oligarchs?
Can I actually say that because I've studied oligarchs for so long, I actually happen to know a lot of them?
You do?
And so I've actually gotten to ask them some...
And you're not on some hit list?
No. I don't know if this is embarrassing or not, but they love my oligarchy book. Which makes me think that something went wrong,
Did they fact check it for you?
Well, yeah, no, because one of the core arguments of the oligarchy book is that oligarchs, when you have an enormous fortune, you face threats to your fortune, to your wealth. Everyone wants to redistribute from below, from above, or other oligarchs want to take your money. So they all related to this core problem. They all say, yes, it's terrible. My fortune is constantly under threat. So they like that part of the book. They ignored a lot of the other parts. But I've had an opportunity, Ben, to ask them some questions. One of the questions that I have asked is, why do you keep not only accumulating wealth, but making sure that no one can progressively tax you or anything else? Why do you keep doing that, even though you cannot possibly spend even a fraction of this? Why are you doing this? And I must say, the answers are never very satisfying. But
because it's fun. Maybe it's fun.
Well, you know what? It's bizarre. It's not. They can already buy every yacht and every plane and every property that they want to. They can do that already. It turns out that you and I compare ourselves to somebody down the street who's got something new that we want. So one of the questions in political science and in social psychology is, who are you comparing yourself with? Who are you competing with? Most of us are not comparing ourselves with oligarchs, but oligarchs are comparing themselves with each other. That's the most satisfying answer I've gotten from any of them. Why do you need 100 billion more? Because so-and-so got 100 billion more. And they're drunk with this. I know this is not a satisfying answer at all. You're looking for something much more, sort of horrifying and evil, as a motivation. But these folks are just, this is what they do. And they don't like the idea of giving up any of those resources except on the terms they want to do so. And that means, for example, philanthropy, charity, with great fanfare and celebration of what they do, but the idea that we would democratically decide through progressive taxation, you're going to pay the following amounts, and we are democratically going to invest in the following things in society, healthcare, education, and so on. No. And they have the power to say no.
Back to our lightning round as we finish up here to get through some more questions. Audience member asks, are both major political parties equally controlled by oligarchs?
Absolutely. Both parties are completely bought and paid for by oligarchs. Here's the difference. This is not even close. And it is why, over 50 years, although we've had an alteration of Democrats and Republicans, oligarchs have done incredibly well over those 50 years.
You need to convince us of that. We're sitting in Johnson County, one of the few remaining liberal counties.
The People's Republic of Johnson
right?
County, right?
But there are Democrats out there going, I agree. Wait a minute, Jeffrey, you just said something that I need to be convinced about.
Okay.
So both are in the hands of oligarchs.
Absolutely.
Both major parties.
Absolutely. Both parties have served oligarchic interests unflinchingly. Let me give you the results of only the most recent presidential election, just as an example. In 2024, Donald Trump raised $1.5 billion to become president. 1/3 of that, over $500 million, was invested by 3 individuals. 3 gave over $500 million. Kamala Harris raised $2 billion, more than Donald Trump. Her biggest, I don't call them donors, by the way. There is no such thing as a mega donor. These are oligarchs. Donors are people who give things selflessly, like blood, okay? Okay, that's a donor, okay? These are political investors, okay? They're investing their money. Okay, these political, on the Democratic side, so for example, the very biggest was Elon Musk, $291 million on the Republican side. The second biggest was someone no one's ever heard of, Timothy Mellon, recluse. Nope, you couldn't pick him out of a lineup. In fact, I couldn't, and I study this, okay? The third one was Miriam Adelson. Those 3, over $500 million. On the Democratic side, the biggest donation was around $50 million. So Kamala Harris got many more oligarchic investments that were smaller.
Well, thank you for this approximately hour of conversation. And I'm delighted, actually personally delighted, I found a chink in your oligarchic knowledge armor in the form of the light bulb joke. One more before we go.
I'm going to claim it, by the way. I think I'm going to use that.
Will you please? No credit to me? Yes. It's not mine. I found it. How many oligarchs does it take to screw in a light bulb? Jeffrey, can't tell you because that information is held in a trust in the Cayman Islands.
And that's it for this hour. We've been listening to highlights from a discussion at the Englert Theatre in Iowa City on May 7th, 2026. Professor of Political Science Jeffrey Winters of Northwestern University was the invited guest of the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council. Thanks to ICFRC Director Peter Gerlach for inviting IPR to be a partner in this event. IPR producer Samantha McIntosh edited today's program. John Pemble was our technical producer. Catherine Perkins is our executive producer. I'm Ben Kiefer. Thanks for joining us.